Are you? Hi there. We are recording. Welcome, welcome. Dan Winter and Tufan and Anna here. And today's presentation is about, is the fire crystal physics and the physics of soul the same? And is that in fact a dividing line, a turning point in galaxy politics for Earth? The way the fire crystal is fired is actually the same way that DNA is fired to make a soul. And is that science of what soul is, physicsofsoul.com, actually the dividing line in the galaxy politics between the parasitic Nebu and the Dracs and the Greys versus the humanoids? So those who have a soul and those who don't, can science know the difference? And is that a turning point in galaxy politics? Hello, everybody. As you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalu.com, fractalfield.com, and I'm here with Tufan Guven, geometricmodels.org.
Hi, everyone.
Anna is Tufan's partner there in Turkey and is very active in our luciddreamteam.com. We should also acknowledge Jenny, who's been leading that group for many years. And Anna is, in my humble opinion, a pretty talented lucid dreamer.
If you say so, Dan. I do consider myself lucky enough to have the ability to lucid dream. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. And, you know, they say, in my case, if you can't do it, teach it. Well, I teach a little about lucid dreaming, but am I good at it? I think it has to do with when I was climbing up the ladder in the Flame in Mind brainwave, I never quite made it up to the gamma very well. I think and we never measured that for you, did we, Anna? Did we?
We did try, but I think I was trying to focus so much on performing, and I think there were some bits and pieces where I managed to get it, but it wasn't very coherent. I think it was just too much focusing on it instead of just letting myself
relax into it.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get to have more fun with that, because Anna and Tufan are coming to our major South France conference here, Science of Consciousness, September 19, fractalfield.com/2024. And Tufan is the organizer and secretary, and he has Virgo in his chart, I think, because he's organized. It's a good thing.
We are going to have our annual party.
Yes, it's our annual party. It's coming very soon in South France. So the theme of today's conversation, we're trying to say that if you understood very simply but very directly the charge collapse implosion physics of how fire crystals are tuned and how fire crystals work, that is directly and exactly the same equation, same frequencies, the same mechanism of Bliss, which fires DNA to implode and make the longitudinal and make a soul, as I've been working on for years at physicsofsoul.com. So if you understood the actual electrical engineering of what a soul is, namely coherent longitudinal EMF, coherent propagation, Ba-from-the-Ka, rainbow light body, Kesjan body, the whole story. If you understood the physics of soul, then not only would you have the turning point physics of the fire crystal from Atlantis, which is like the key leverage of galaxy politics, differentiating high-level and low-level gravity-making civilizations, but you would also have a scientific way of talking about the dividing line between civilizations who have turned to AI control and not what I would call ensoulment, literally those who have a soul and those who don't. You can't have that conversation unless you have some physics to talk about what a soul is. Otherwise, and then you also can't have the conversation about drawing a line in the sand about saying AI could be dangerous. You can't put that line in the sand until you know what a soul is. Otherwise, so if, I say if our species is to survive, we're going to need to know what is physicsofsoul.com. Now, one of the primary ways we teach that, to predict if you have a soul and you're going to take memory through death is if you have the skill to lucid dream. This is where Anna comes in. So the idea is that, and we're going to show the slides in. We've got a beautiful slideshow coming up, guys. But in the slideshow, you'll see the university studies of the frequencies that in university study are known to trigger lucid dream. Hint, phase conjugate, fractal compression. Hint, the same frequencies that effectively drive Therify.net, also famous for triggering lucid dream. And the Aboriginals call it dreaming track songline, the longitudinal array of the earth. So if you can lucid dream, it's one of the best predictors you're going to take memory through death. The physics of lucid dreaming, we believe strongly then, is the same actually as the physics of soul, is that your body can propagate this particular kind of electrical field called longitudinal coherence, sometimes called scalar, sometimes called vril. I think these words are colorful, but I don't think they're sometimes called torsional, also by the Russians. I think these words are synonyms, but I think the electrical engineering terms, directional longitudinal coherent EMF, is more accurate and useful for scientists. But in any case, it's a compressional wave that goes further and bounces around a fractal array, which is the Earth grid sacred sites and the dreaming tracks. So if you can propagate coherently into that array, not only have you got a lucid dream, and those frequency signatures that predict that lucid dream also predict kids who can see without their eyes, and also predict the ability to have bliss, which not only defines whether you get an immune system, but according to the Aboriginals, if you can't teach your kids to have bliss, you ain't got culture. So Anna mentioned the other day when we were discussing it, Anna is one of the leading coordinators of our luciddreamteam.com, along with wonderful Jenny. And we were discussing, and I asked Anna, I said, well, do you feel like you actually leave your body? And she said, not so much. But then we're talking about the wave mechanics. And I said, well, does it feel like wave mechanics when you're doing this? And then she started explaining how she uses a vortex visualization in her dreaming. And that's evidence of that this is a magnetic field. So if you want to just tell that story briefly, Anna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So just to start with, it wasn't always like that. I wasn't like a lucid dreamer from my childhood. But I was kind of introduced to your work and to lucid dreaming through some people. And then what I started doing first is like looking at either Star Mother Kit or Tauruses or different geometries. And I kind of trying to recreate it in my imagination with my eyes closed. And that kind of gave an idea of those geometries and how helpful they can be. I understood it later that they can be very helpful in my lucid dreaming. But then what I actually discovered through practice is that I always been drawn to vortexes, and I've never kind of understood why I would draw it in my notebook. It was just always there, always, yes, exactly. And then what happened is that I understood that whenever I was either lucid dreaming, imagining things, if I imagine myself in the field of a vortex, which now it's kind of very easy for me to create it, then there would be more clarity. I would have a clearer vision. I would understand things clearer. And it would just, even though it seems like it's a chaotic phase, because there's this movement, but with that movement, there is this, the Planck threshold when you settle yourself, and this is where the peace is coming. This is where you kind of expand. And thanks to that, if I would practice that with another person, there would be more clarity. And it's the thing that I do. And yeah, I'm really happy with it because I feel it's right. I feel that this is the right wave. This is the right mechanism for me to kind of change also the brain waves, because I feel whenever I imagine a vortex around me and me being a vortex, my brain waves change. So it's very interesting. There's a different vibration. And of course, there are different levels and you can go deeper and deeper. It comes with practice, and I have been fortunate enough to kind of practice it with Jen and other members. But the moment you go deeper, your brain waves change, and then you can access kind of more information about yourself, about the environment. Your senses start to open up. So, I mean, it's, yeah, for me, vortex is the answer.
It's great that you mentioned Planck also, because, we're going to show in a minute that the brainwave harmonics is a Planck-Fire a caduceus cascade leading directly to Planck by golden ratio. And at that implosion point, the centripetal force is generated, giving centering force, and therefore implosion, therefore inertia, therefore power too. And so we see that the brainwave physics fit the lucid dreaming physics, which is get centripetal or else.
Yes, yes.
And also, there's also the old story about you're in the dream and you want to gain lucidity in the dream. So you look at your hand in the dream, I'm sure you've heard about that. But the idea is that when you're in the dream and you choose to look at your hand, the do loop, the recursive connection loop between where the hand neurons connect and the homunculus of the brain, that do loop tightens and implodes. And so your whole aura begins to implode in that vortex do loop. And that makes you more centripetal and therefore contain more inertia in your dream.
Yes, I haven't had the chance of imploding inside a dream while being asleep. Not yet. Hopefully that will happen. However, yes, it's very interesting how exposing yourself to specific knowledge or specific geometry influences the dreams and how you behave in the dreams. Because I've noticed that once I started kind of even just pondering or looking at Star Mother Kid or Taurus, playing with it, the quality of my dreams changed. Exactly. It's just, I think it's just what you expose yourself to kind of it's reflected in your dreams and the quality of dreams and how you behave in the dreams. But yeah, I haven't had the chance of kind of imploding in the dream.
It's kind of a recursive turning inside out, at least in theory. And the
Yes.
other part of where this film is now going to go with the slideshow in a minute is to try to say that if we really get clear on what is the science of what is a soul, we can begin to sort which civilizations, are ensouled and therefore service and therefore democratic versus those civilizations more likely to be parasitic, specifically because, and if, do they have a soul? The Greys, the Dracos, who has a soul and does? And so do you think it might be an appropriate, there's a cat speaking of, but do you think it might be appropriate that we ask the question when we're wondering if the ET who just knocked on your door is the good guys or the bad guys? The way to find out is you ask them, can you lucid dream? Would that be, in other words, of the people that you have met, for example, who can lucid dream, is that more of an indicator of a kind of coherence and possibly ensoulment?
Well, I believe that, when you go to this squeeze point, those entities, they cannot go through that because they don't have that charge to go through that squeeze point. Yes.
Beautiful.
But
thank you for saying our favorite idea. Only the shareable wave makes it through implosion. Exactly.
yes, but you also have to, I think you have to be kind of a little bit careful how you approach it, because I've been told, and I kind of agree with it, that if you take the wrong perhaps feelings, or if you're chaotic in yourself and you want to implode, right, you might kind of take it with you and then it becomes bigger and bigger. So if you implode with problems, the problems might become bigger and bigger. So if your heart is clear and if your intentions are pure, I think this is where you implode fully. And I believe that not a lot of people, I think people have that ability. They just don't know how to do it. And I strongly believe that vortex is the geometry that can help.
Exactly. And so then we have the whole section, Golden Mean Immortality, where we show the four visions, Heinrich Clouvet, form constants, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. Classic geometry seen in the process of dying, which are literally the spin symmetries of implosion, a vortex superposed on a vortex. So successful death, we're saying, is exactly the same process of imploding through successful compression. That's why we're so insistent that if you practice lucid dreaming, you'll do a great job at dying.
And also, if I may add, a short experience about the dreaming qualities connected with symmetries, like the Star Mother kit. When I got my first Star Mother kit from you then, like 10 years ago, I noticed that after visualizing and observing the Star Mother kit, after a couple of days, I noticed that my dream states started changing. Like every morning I woke up with a sense of fulfillment without reason, consciously. I knew that there was something subconsciously. I could not remember my exact dreams, what they were, but then I started questioning, why am I happy or fulfilled in the mornings when I wake up? And then afterwards, I noticed that the sole observation of the symmetry sequence or symmetry operations inside the star mother kit, which is a result of combination of golden ratios.
Perfected
Symmetries
implosion.
based on golden ratios. Yeah, perfect fractal geometries, dodecaicosa. Then I realized that I started embedding those symmetries and understandings in my neural network, and that most probably, in my humble opinion, changed my subconscious states, and it brought itself through the fulfillment during my dream states. And this was the reason of my peaceful and fulfilled states when I woke up afterwards. I just wanted to add that
That's beautiful.
to our
Beautiful.
context.
Yeah, so the geometric tool to learn how to implode from within is powerful in the dreaming and in the generation of that implosion that makes soul. So that's where this conversation is going. And it's also, and by the way, you can order your Star Mother kit from Tufan at geometricmodels.org, goldenmean.info/kit. And we're going to be then talking also about the newest version of the Planck tuner. So all of these conversations are about if you can charge collapse successfully, which is to gain energy during collapse, then that's what fires the crystal. That's what fires the DNA. It's what fires your heart. It's what fires gravity. It's what fires hydrogen. Because through that imploding series, tuned to Planck, planckfire.com, out the center of that squirt gun, the diameter of the squirt gun nozzle is exactly Planck, is squirted this coherent, organized directional longitudinal EMF, which is bioactive, which is the only physics of gravity waves, which was called the vril, which is potentially negentropic. It's how implosion occurs. So that tuning mechanism is essential to this understanding of if you can charge collapse, you can make a 0-point energy crystal that makes gravity. Oh, you can make DNA that makes gravity. Oh, you can make a soul. Oh, you can make a way through death. Hello, it's all about charge collapse. Which brings us
So it's solution. Sorry, it's the solution to all self-organizing systems, basically.
Yes, exactly. All in the entry. Beautiful. Thank you. See, we're preaching to the choir here, guys, but we hope you agree. But it's true that if you really understand charge collapse, I mean, conventional physics agrees charge collapse causes gravity and causes consciousness. Conventional physics just doesn't know what causes charge collapse. Hint, planckfire.com, which brings us to our slideshow. Okay, and we're going to bring in Tufan again in a minute, particularly when we get to Fibonacci versus golden ratio. So that's the theme of this conversation is we were studying the physics of what makes the fire crystal go, which is a phase conjugate pump wave, which is exactly the physics of what makes DNA make a soul, physics of soul.com, that phase conjugate pump wave being Bliss harmonics, for example. And that differentiation, to understand that, we're suggesting in this conversation is a dividing line, a turning point, a defining threshold in the galaxy politics of Earth. And not to just have an ad here, but Tufan is using this occasion to announce a new version of the Planck tuner for planckfire.com. Notice here that you can actually see why is the British foot in the tablet of Shamash? Because it is perfected charge collapse. And you can tune that with the Planck tuner, where you actually see the foot and the power of golden ratio times Planck, so that you can create both sacred ratio and sacred scale with one tool and create charge collapse accurately and therefore sacred space accurately. And just to say that this lecture was originally prepared for my presentation yesterday with Sasha on the galactic status report. Now, I did this lecture and we had a lot of fun. I recommend you tune in to Sasha there, LazarusInitiative.com, and see yesterday's conversation. It was great. A lot of fun with Laura Eisenhower, Michael Sala, and Marina Jacobi had all kinds of, basically channeling of the galaxies. It was really fun. And Sasha had his giant Vajra there. You'll see that in a minute. So it was the usual fun. But the point was that for that conversation, I only got about 1/3 of the way through the presentation. Obviously, there wasn't time. So we want to do a much more in-depth version of this presentation now, although we certainly recommend you can look at what we presented with Sasha yesterday. So sort of the subtitle of this conversation is the Nebu Borg Drac versus the Galactic Federation and humanoids, the Federation versus the Borg. Is that in essence the epic conflict between soul versus soullessness? Because if we understood that difference, maybe we could actually, make a difference in deciding the conflict after we learn what is the physics of soul.com. So, and we're going to use in this conversation the theme or the example of the physics of and the karma of the Atlantean fire crystal. And many of these slides are from firecrystal.com. We're launching a new product series of the correct way to fire crystals, which were called the Toy Stone by Edgar Cayce, and I worked in his library in Virginia Beach. So the history and karma of fire crystals are key in the big picture in galactic history about AI domination versus the actual physics of ensoulment, because the fire crystal was fired with the actual physics of how DNA is fired. The same exact frequency cascade that makes a fire crystal work and be zero-point energy and make gravity and do charge collapse is exactly the measurable frequencies that cause DNA to recursively braid and implode and make the coherent longitudinal called having a soul. So when we line those ideas up, if we sort and parse the history and karma and physics of Atlantis fire crystal, we can then trip over, oh, we have learned the physics of soul. Now, I want to honor in this conversation Elena Danan's recent seminar in which she went into great depth, very useful, in the history of Atlantis. And I've done a lot of lectures with Elena, and I think her work on the history is really essential, fabulous, and useful. We hope to take the physics further here. That's where we're going with this. So in one of those lectures, I did many with Elena. Here's a picture of Elena holding the Sanskrit Vajra, the Vajra, also called a Dorji. The point is, if you observe at the center, there was a crystal. And Elena was actually in Enki's laboratory on Nebu in orbit around Saturn or Jupiter. And he showed her, Enki Ea, who is actually literally Poseidon, Neptune, we believe, that grasping the center of that Vajra, at the center hold point she is holding right there, there's a clicker. And that clicker delivers a piezoelectric phonon shock wave to the central fire crystal in the center of that Vajra Dorji. And that shock wave then piezoelectrically couples, as we're going to explain the physics in great detail right now, causing a massive coherent longitudinal wave to be propagated out the ends. The Luke Skywalker's lightsaber. Actually, the idea is that not only is the clicker at the center delivering a piezo phonon cascade shockwave, but if your aura is implosive, then that's also the leverage you have to create this plasma torch that comes out the end. Many pictures of the ancient Vajra stone. It's more than Poseidon. It's actually a picture of how you create a directional longitudinal. There are some stories that a crystal in the middle was substituted in some case for a red mercury vortex. And we'll explain later the red mercury vortex serves the same function, imploding a coherent longitudinal directionally, like the Nazi Bell Vimana. So these are some of the lectures I've done with Elena Danan, and we want to thank them. We're not saying that anything that Elena Danan and Dan Willis have taught is not helpful. I particularly admire also Dan Willis's research on the history and also Michael Sala's work on the history. But when it comes to the physics of how the fire crystals work, we believe that we have something that's far more in depth here, and that's what we're trying to share. So many of these notes are at firecrystal.com, and the fire crystal is similar to the pyramid, being called a gravity diode because it's precisely piezoelectrically tuned to implode the Earth's Schumann harmonic cascade, which is a phase conjugate pump wave whose harmonics are identical with the brainwave harmonics that make Bliss. You take that phase conjugate pump wave caduceus in the Earth's Schumann harmonics, in the brain harmonics, and you implode that into a fire crystal or your DNA. And the squeeze operation, because of the recursive braiding, and we're going to see graphics coming up here, that what's squeezed out the center of that vortex is specifically coherent longitudinal interferometry. So here's what the cascade looks like. It's a golden ratio caduceus. And here are the actual harmonics in that cascade. Actually, this is from the physics of therify.net. This is the frequencies we feed to Therify, literally. And here you see where the caduceus kisses noses at center is the Planck threshold. And it's there and only there that the aligned transverse becomes longitudinal compressional, more organized, and then bounces through the array transparently and achieves action at a distance, gravity waves, bioactivity, and negentropy. Now here we have an example, thanks to Patrick Botti, of early version of our work showing that the ultimate way to trigger the fire crystal is with piezofire.com, because how else are you going to make this exact, perfect, wonderful piezoelectric phonon cascade? It's piezofire.com. More in a minute on that. So here is from pyramidwirelesspower.com. These are the actual harmonics of the Schumann cascade here. This in blue on the top here is the PlanckFire.com harmonics. In green here, well, I'm sorry, it's so small, but in green are the actual Schumann harmonics. So you see the Schumann harmonics are actually Planck fire harmonics, implosive cascade. And when that cascade reaches the pyramid or the fire crystal, it's selectively dimensioned and ratioed so that the harmonics couple exactly in this cascade, thus imploding. We'll see in a minute that the Koski-Frost crystal, the fire crystal that's actually been researched here recently, achieves this because the charge collapse implosion, actually the Koski-Frost crystal changed size radically before generating 800 times its own weight in gravity. And this is to study further how the dimensions of the crystal allow that implosion. So this is the physics we're saying that Dan Willis's group has not figured out, and we suggest it's essential. If you would like to teach the physics of how fire crystals work, you have to know this, or you don't understand how charge collapse, gain energy during collapse, is happening inside the fire crystal and how the Vril coherent longitudinal is produced. So what happens is that the dimensions of the crystal, exactly like the dimensions of the pyramid, called a Hummer, are exactly such that they couple with exactly these wavelengths, called Planck fire charge collapse. And when you get those wavelengths coupled in one piezoelectric system, the whole thing implodes, collapse together. And you're going to see in a minute, this Koski-Frost crystal. Well, first, the profound analog is between the phase conjugate pump wave, which makes a fire crystal in quartz, versus the same wave shape, the way DNA piezo but pentahelix makes a soul when triggered by the phonon geometry of Bliss, which are the same Schumann harmonics, which is why they call the pyramid a Hummer and a gravity diode. And this fire crystal is also a Hummer and a gravity diode. So this is the famous Koski-Frost crystal, and you can read the book on the Koski-Frost crystal here at fractalfield.com/propulsion by our friend and partner, Elizabeth Bill Donovan, Glimpse of Epiphany. And basically, by pumping the correct frequency cascade into this crystal, it changed size by a ratio of 20 times its former length, a volume increase of 4,000 to 1, just before it made 800 times its own weight in gravity. This is an example. So you get phase conjugate pump wave, phase conjugate charge collapse in a correct dielectric implosive crystal. And that implosive process squeezes out coherent longitudinal out one end, the only physics of gravity waves, also called Vril. Called Vril because the planar face of that coherent longitudinal EMF can become centripetal and thus bioactive. It's sweet, potentially. So we have lots of charts on the frequencies which make that go. Here, this is the, actually, we need to make this a little bit bigger. We can do that here. So this is the Planck fire cascade retuned to 7.83 Schumann from the original 7.29 Hertz theoretical Schumann. And when you correct PlanckFire.com to the actual Schumann cascade, you get the actual frequencies we measured in Sam's Bosnian pyramid, where people come from all over the world and they get rejuvenation. And originally, interestingly, Dan Willis chose two of these frequencies, 20 and 4096, to talk about fire crystals. Then later, so here's just this is the same picture. This is the Planck fire frequencies here. This is the Schumann frequencies here at the asterisk. And these are those same frequencies which make the brain waves, alpha, beta, gamma cascade, which makes Bliss, called a phase conjugate implosive pump wave. Okay, so then what that wave looks like, just a
Must revolve.
it's imploding on the left. You see, it's imploding.
Becomes alive.
So this charge collapse is the secret behind almost everything. And now we're getting close to where we wanted Tufan to share here in a moment. So basically, I determined that PlanckFire.com was the necessary frequencies. And this is the equation, Planck times golden ratio, cause of gravity, cause of consciousness, cause of life force, cause of all negentropy, cause of hydrogen structure. That this equation, Planck times golden ratio exponents, integer exponents golden ratio, creates a cascade, which is fractality perfected, and that charge collapse is the reason gravity, life force, consciousness, and negentropy exists. And that frequency series is right here, 7.29. I mentioned the theoretical. And interestingly, after I communicated that to Dan Willis from marcelvogel.org published this frequency series here, 10, 20, 30, 50, 81, 30, which was a simple Fibonacci cascade, almost, but not accurately imitating the real wave mechanics. And here's actually Dan Willis's slide showing that simple Fibonacci cascade. And what we said was, the only way someone would publish this as the correct frequencies was they had done some trial and error and gotten close, but did not understand the pure principle, or were not willing to communicate it either way. But the pure principle is implosive charge collapse, PlanckFire.com, and the approximation is this Fibonacci cascade. And so Tufan prepared this slide to help us understand the difference between a Fibonacci cascade and the golden ratio. The Fibonacci cascade leads to golden ratio, and it's beautiful and elegant, and it approximates nature. But the actual accurate wave mechanics is always simply golden ratio exactly. And I'm going to turn off this slideshow now. And Tufan has prepared a little bit more in depth on this difference between the Fibonacci versus pure golden ratio wave mechanics.
Thanks, Dad. So I'm going to share my latest presentation that I presented at fractalu.com earlier this year. So I'm going to share my screen here for a second.
It asks you which window you want to, yeah.
Yes, there you go.
There we go.
Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, I see a pine cone. Good.
Perfect. So golden ratio is a very critical context in the universal formula when we talk about self-organizing systems like biological systems like the DNA or the solar system, even the universe. So this is the underlying ratio. And what we want to focus in this couple of slides here, I want to explain the clear difference between the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, because both of them.
We love the charge distribution efficiency. That's the point.
Yes.
That's the solution to heaven and lucid dreaming, charge distribution. And the fact that implosion creates charge distribution efficiency is the point. So thank you.
Right.
Sorry, Tufan.
So the purpose of this lecture is not to pick up on anyone, but just to explain the difference so that people who want to develop this science for the benefit of humanity can understand the foundational principles, especially between those two systems, between golden ratio and Fibonacci sequence. And both systems, both golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, are very useful in their own areas, in their specific areas, and we would like to expand on those areas so we understand clearly the difference. So as you can see here, in nature specifically uses the Fibonacci sequence, especially when we talk about the plant life, or also with the ratios of animals and humans as well. But when you look at the plant life, it's easier to see in the spiraling ratios or in the petals of flowers. And there will be some deviations to that, but what we are saying is that the dominant ratio is the Fibonacci sequence when you look at the arrangement of the petals or the spiraling numbers on the sunflower or other floral systems. And another example from the plant life is that the Fibonacci sequence is also very instructive in understanding the distribution here. When you look at the number of leaves in each level here, you will see the corresponding Fibonacci sequence numbers. For example, first level, there is 1 leaf. The second level, again, another 1 leaf. And then the next level, you will see 2 leaves and 3 leaves and 5 and 8. This is also in line with the branching. You will see that first there is 1 trunk and then 2 branches and then 3, 5, 8, and 13. So those systems specifically use Fibonacci sequence because you cannot have 1.618 branch. The branch has to be in whole numbers, either 1 or 0 or 2. So you cannot have 1.618 branch, or you cannot have 1.618 leaf
or children.
petal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So
we call it maximum exposure, minimum superposition, the best way to share.
right. Phyllotaxis.
Yes.
And so the nature uses this system to perfect itself towards golden ratio. And this is a beautiful system, and it is crucial and necessary. So it's a beautiful system, but this is where it is being used. And when we specifically look at the golden ratio, now, when we talk about wave systems or wave mechanics like frequencies, we have to stick to golden ratio instead of the Fibonacci sequence. And I would like to give some useful examples here. One of them is this very famous Stradivarius 5 chambers, which was developed by, the understanding was developed by Stradivarius, but then it was later taken on by the leading hi-fi companies, building their musical spaces, so that when you arrange the dimensions of any space, let's say you have a concert hall or you would like to build your room for the best musical experience, the optimum musical experience, what you need to do is at least arrange 2 dimensions of your space with golden ratio. For example, the length of the room versus the height. If you can arrange 2 dimensions connected to golden ratio 1.618, you would eliminate the unwanted standing waves in terms of sound. For example, when you go to a concert hall, for example, there's a space there, and when you hear the music, and as you walk along the inside the space, you will notice specific frequencies. They tend to gather at specific points. Like when you go to the corner, you will hear a higher bass. When you come to the middle, you will have a different sound. So you eliminate that unwanted standing waves with golden ratio. This is a useful example from the physics of waves, actually. So what we are suggesting is that if a wave system works with golden ratio, then other systems in frequencies would work with golden ratio as well. And we have proof for that. This is only one example. And
yes, and
also,
you could say that the golden ratio would allow there to be a sweet spot, literally an implosion point. And we see the phonon sweet spot implosion point is very similar to the capacitive sweet spot. So the sacred space could be created by exactly that.
yes.
If I may add, sorry, can I just say something,
Go
because
ahead,
that's part of an idea, is that when you said, like, golden mean ratio is, if you want to optimize your experience, golden mean ratio is there to optimize that. And I know I've just recently kind of read that the heart itself physically has golden ratio in it, like physically. So I think, like, if you can learn how to implode within your heart, I mean, it already has the golden ratio. So if you know how to use imagery to implode in the heart, I mean, you optimize your own experience perfectly. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
Lovely.
Thanks,
example.
Anna. Anna recently shared a very nice scientific article which displayed the golden ratio within the heart itself. through different dimensions, and maybe we can share that once you upload the video on YouTube in the description later. So when you look at this chart here, you will see that if you add two numbers in the sequence to each other, you will get the next number. For example, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 5 is 8. This is how you get the Fibonacci sequence. And if you divide them to each other, you will also get different numbers, all perfecting itself towards 1.618. For example, 1 divided by 1 equals to 1. And that shows at the bottom of the chart here. And 2 divided by 1 is 2. Again, you will see the second point. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. And as you continue dividing the numbers in the sequence, they will tend to perfect themselves towards golden ratio. And this is the critical point why nature uses the Fibonacci sequence. As I said, the nature wants to perfect itself through the Fibonacci sequence. So it is the only way that nature goes towards the Fibonacci, the golden ratio. So the Fibonacci sequence perfects itself towards golden ratio, but the starting point of the Fibonacci sequence are the whole numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 instead of 1.618. So
Gabriel's horn. Yeah.
Second.
Gabriel's horn.
Right. It does look like the Gabriel's horn, and maybe at the end of the time, when the Gabriel, uses the horn, it means that anything is not in line with the pure principle will be filtered out. Could be taken as that.
And that looks like Anna's vortex right there.
Right. And so in the next slide, by using the same chart, I left this. Can you see my cursor here?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I left the space white, the point where the system perfects itself towards 1.618 within the Fibonacci sequence. And I highlighted the top part in the chart and the bottom part. And you will see that the vertical axis here shows the division of numbers between 1 and 2. And as we went through in the earlier slide, the divisions of the numbers give those points. And you will notice that the first 5 numbers in the sequence, I'll move this towards left. The first 5 numbers, which are 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, the divisions of those numbers, they fall into these blue areas where I highlighted them because they are deviations. So they are still not in the perfect golden ratio line spectrum. So they are deviations. So this is why if you use a Fibonacci sequence in a frequency system, let's say 10 frequencies in a system, the first 4 or 5 frequencies, they will deviate from the perfect golden ratio. Let's say you use 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 hertz. The first 4 or 5, they will deviate greatly, and then they will tend to perfect itself. So
that's great, Tufan. But maybe just kind of move along, and we're going to run out of time here. It's
sure.
A beautiful point you made, though. Beautiful point.
But this is the main difference between the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio when we talk about frequencies applied to crystals. So there's a deviation in the beginning of 4 or 5 numbers.
Right. So the crystal needs the perfect wave mechanics.
Exactly. And this is why this was used in architecture, in churches, temple design, and so on. And also in the tablet of Shamash. And in the tablet of Shamash, they did not only use the golden ratio, but it was perfectly fit scale towards Planck length. And you can see the dimensions on the sides here, that the length of the tablet of Shamash is exactly 1 foot, which is Planck length times golden ratio to the power of 164. And you can measure that with the Planck tuner here. We talked about this before with Dan. And even when you go with the smaller scales on the tablet of Shamash, you get to see the Planck scale in smaller scales. So these were pretty much it that I wanted to share with you guys. I hope that you understood the difference between the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, specifically when we talk about the frequencies or wave mechanics, that golden ratio is essential and Fibonacci sequence is also essential with other systems, but not wave mechanics. Thank you.
Thank you, Tufan. That was great. And we could say that the tablet of Shamash was, in a way, being tuned like a fire crystal. I wonder if it's high dielectric. Okay, so then you could turn off your slide share there.
Yes, sure.
And we're going to go back to, so where we want to go from here now, we want to say that that exact frequency cascade, Planck fire, that Tufan was just talking about, we see more examples and how that's actually how fire crystals work and how DNA is fired. So the history of that, when Marcel Vogel approximated golden ratio, he did not use parallel sides so that crystal could not be accurately tuned without parallel sides. So you could approximate phase conjugate pump wave, but you couldn't do it accurately. But interestingly, Marcel worked out a way to use his breath to fire the crystal. I was there when he controlled the plant on the polygraph by pointing his crystal at it, and the crystal did emit the longitudinal, the vril, and the plant polygraph did respond. And Marcel Vogel was sweating, but he was accurately working at his breath. And we're about to see how the frequency series of the correct breath actually is the perfect phase conjugate pump wave. Yeah, so what we're saying is here, Vogel crystals, while beautiful and can be used, you can have a lot of fun, they're powerful in their own way, but for accurate tuning to charge collapse, we're going to need a crystal whose sides are parallel, but because you can't get that gradation accurately in the cascade to Planck otherwise. Now here we're talking about, if you want to get out your handy piezofire.com and piezoelectrically trigger the exact correct cascade from any phone or audio source. Oops, oh no, there it is. Use it. The only way to get this cascade, it's a very complex wave function, the whole caduceus cascade pumped into your crystal. You got this cascade, which needs to be pumped into your crystal. Well, guess what? You can pump this entire cascade as piezoelectric 180-degree phase opposite pairs up and down the cascade, like 13 to 20 harmonics at a time with piezofire.com, because it uses flameinmind.com, the Flame and Sound Bliss binaural. Another example to understand this is when Tesla first learned to project coherent longitudinal, he was using a carbon arc like this Buckminster fullerene carbon, which is a phase conjugator. The carbon nanotubes are phase conjugators. So this is how Tesla got into beam technology, projecting coherent longitudinal. He started with a carbon arc. And fullerenes are negentropic here because they're conjugated, named after my friend Bucky, who never learned about fullerenes. And so we're saying that this planckfire.com is the electric reason gravity exists and objects fall to the ground. It's the electric reason perception and bliss exist, phase conjugate pump wave. It's the electric reason seeds germinate. And here's examples, the life force measure, and also at therify.net, you'll see the examples on life force, on roses. It's the electric reason for soul, longitudinal charge collapse. Literally, it's this recursive Bradian squeezing that compresses DNA to squeeze out coherent longitudinal, the stuff of soul, Bafram Ka, Kesjan, rainbow light body. It's the reason pyramids and obelisks and fire crystals make global wireless power, pyramidwirelesspower.com. That same wave cascade phase conjugate pump wave, planckfire.com, is the reason all zero point and vacuum energy exists. There's one article on fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. It's the electric reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics in general, because charge collapse is the way gravity is stabilized. Fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. It's the electric reason electron shells and nuclear hadrons and planetary orbitals are platonic nests, because a platonic nest is a way to make golden ratio and therefore charge collapse. So your chemistry teacher forgot to tell you that the SPDF subshells are torus, tetracube, dodeca, ecosa, and the nuclear hadrons are the same. So the whole atomic table is simply and elegantly a platonic nest. All the pictures, goldenmean.info/creation. It's the electric reason for all action at a distance. Entanglement is an introduction to phase conjugation optimized by PlanckFire.com. And that's what makes the longitudinal go down those tubes. It is the mechanism of all action at a distance, and virtually all spiritual stories about action at a distance start with charge collapse, incorrectly called entanglement, which engages the longitudinal interferometry, the physics of action at a distance. Oh, and by the way, what a great example of a phase conjugate pump wave. If you say, if you say that correctly, look at the wave shape you make in the power spectra. It's implosive charge collapse. It's a path to an implosive still point. It's phase conjugate pump wave. That's what ohm is. We don't have to go into all the physics today, but here's the introductory chart from the book, which has gone somewhat viral. It's high on the Amazon list, PlanckFire.com. You take Planck, multiply by Golden ratio, and you get everything negentropic. Hydrogen radii, ATP, height versus diameter of DNA. You get the exact only two frequencies of photosynthesis. You get the British foot, as Tufan just said. You get the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics. You get the Mayer wave. You get the Venus Earth year, galactic year, precessional year. You get all forms of negentropy because of charge collapse. PlanckFire.com is the charge collapse physics already knew causes gravity and consciousness. This is an example from the spacecraft that Elena talks about. There's the central fire crystal. It was called the dilithium crystals from Scotty and Star Trek. But lithium niobate is actually potentially a piezo phase conjugator. And if you get the scale correct and implode it, so understanding how you get the axes, the different axes lined up in that crystal to implode exactly these frequencies is how fire crystals work by charge collapse. This is an example of how the body uses the phase conjugate. These are all Planck fire frequencies in red here. And in green are the tidal frequencies which cause sacrocranial pump. And if your sacrocranial is pumping, Kundalini, for example, it is clinically impossible to be depressed, especially the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, most important frequency in the blood, in the body, and in the HRV, 0.1 hertz. It's all Golden ratio times Planck. It's an implosive cascade. So we have many pictures. This is, again, the Schumann harmonics versus the equation. And this is showing that connection to brain waves again. And if we pump those brain waves, we get action at a distance. We already saw that slide. So the people who tell you that tetralogic is the solution to AI is like the origin of the Hebrew alphabet. Yes, it is the index to the nest of donuts. Here's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, just changing the tetracube indexed by the symmetry axes of the 7 arrows of the tetrad. Okay, but it isn't that tetralogic itself is implosive. No, it's a step one to proceed toward phase conjugation, which is a superset hypercube pentadodeca, where the cube embeds in the dodeca. So tetra-only symmetries are not ensouled, unfortunately. And this goes into a whole discussion about the Hebrew alphabet and the issue, if this is a DNA programming language, was this the recipe for soul or not? And that's a bit of a heavy conversation. But so this is a summary of this section of the slideshow. We suggest there's a central problem for the evolution of tech, like firecrystal.com, among races struggling with AI versus children who actually have a soul. And this is my, I've stood on my soapbox 1,000 times and said this, that we're losing, millions of children are losing their soul today because they go to bed with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi stuffed in their ears, absolutely fractionating their aura, in dead air electrosmog in metal aluminum buildings. And there is no chance those children are going to have a good shot at lucid dreaming, namely getting and having a soul. So we are breeding soulless children on a mass scale on this planet today because our governments don't know what a soul is. And those same governments are then susceptible to AI control, because if you don't know what a soul is, you can't draw the line in the sand for AI. Hello, is AI dangerous? Well, of course, all around the galaxy. Is it necessary? Yes. But can you tell the difference for when it's serving us versus when AI is not serving us? You will not know until you learn the physics of soul. Then you can decide what AI is serving us and what isn't. So we must teach our children physicsofsoul.com. So we say that people who specifically inherited soulless Draco blood through Enlil Yahweh, the Draco, are merely a local example of being challenged in this way. Ask them if they can lucid dream. Historical credit here, the story of Anu, father of Enlil, the Draco, Yahweh, was bribed with the Stargate, the Orion Trapezium Cube, the biggest Stargate in our galaxy. He was bribed with that. I think Elena's probably right about this, to marry a Draco. Enlil's mother, Enlil, Yahweh, was raised as a Draco. And Anu, the father, came to regret that bribe, clearly, because after Enlil Yahweh became the largest plasma parasite in the solar system for thousands of years, Anu was helpless to get the Draco out of the solar system because the Draco Siakar would attack the Anak Empire until only about 2-3 years ago. I think Elena's got to be right, when the Galactic Federation and the Negumak, who like eating Dracos actually, joined the Anak and the Galactic Federation and kicked first the Draco Gray Nebu out of our solar system and now out of our galaxy. So if Anne Rice is correct, and Vampire Drac was probably the largest plasma parasite, the Grim Reaper in the history of the solar system. So this is an example of the conflict is about those who have a soul and those who don't. Basically, those who die without being able to attract their own source of charge, which is to say, if you die without knowing a source of bliss, you are, by definition, electrically a parasite because you do not have a source of charge. This is why culture is defined by, can you teach your young people to have a bliss experience? Because that is the moment at which they are no longer electrically a parasite. And if you die without that skill, you're condemned in the astral ascended masters ? Astral parasites ? So studying the astral hygiene issue of astral parasites requires knowing the physics of soul, because it's how plasma becomes self-organizing. That is the physics of soul. So the soul is specifically the known and measurable coherent longitudinal EMF the body produces and radiates by bliss implosion compression, the Ba from the Ka, rainbow light body, Kesjan body. This is illustrated by the university documented phase conjugate pump wave frequencies, we're coming to Anna again, known to trigger lucid dreaming. Therify.net also uses these frequencies and is known for triggering lucid dreaming. Ability to lucid dream, get coherent, and embed within the longitudinal array the dreaming track is probably one of the best indicators of whether you can take memory through death and therefore have a soul. The second major indicator of presence of soul is the ability to make the known phase conjugate pump wave coherent brain waves, which make bliss. Theta, alpha to gamma, golden ratio, and octave cascades measured, flameinmind.com, as when we measured Jean-Charles Moyen's ability to teleport repeatedly with witnesses, we got extreme coherence in the golden ratio octave cascades between alpha and gamma in his brainwaves. He imploded in his brainwaves and inhabited the array, and many witnesses documented his teleports. So this is an introduction to inhabiting the array. This phase conjugate pump waves in your brainwaves, coupled to coherent EKG, heart rate variability, realheartcoherence.com, we just showed the graphic, and their sacrocranial correlate, the physics of Kundalini. These coherent biological phase conjugate pump waves are precisely the same exact frequency recipe, plankfire.com. They drive the firecrystal.com, and the same frequencies exactly are what drive DNA to braid recursively and implode. So this is from the goldenmean.info/Kundalini, where we work out those same frequencies, same cascade in the sacrocranial and the breath and the heart rate variability in the brainwave and the Schumann. The same cascade, identical cascade, is imploding and driving human bliss, the biophysics of Kundalini, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. So this was the central slide. So when you align that vortex, the transverse EMF enters the vortex on the left here, going up and down, and by what's called optimized translation of vorticity down the caduceus cascade of perfect implosive squeezing, the translation of vorticity squirts out the other end of the squirt gun, the nozzle being exactly Planck, a coherent longitudinal EMF, sometimes called the vril, sometimes called a gravity wave. And to get that lined up, when you're emitting coherently that longitudinal wave, your aura changes. You have the Ba from the Ka, and you have the ability to lucid dream. We're not going to go into all of the physics of hydrogen based on the same equation. But just to show you, Tom Bearden was very clear by equation, coherent longitudinal EMF is the stuff of which gravity waves are made, hint, centripetal force, hint, charge implosion is gravity, and it is the stuff which causes seeds to grow, causes biology to happen. A seed grows if it can suck its first nutrient, called implosion. So obviously you put a seed of rose in Therify and magic stuff happens because you put an implosive field. And oh, by the way, the first nuclear device was called implosion because, now looking at this slide, can you guess why it was that Bruce Cathy measured that nuclear critical mass is reduced at Earth grid line cross points? Look at the slide and guess to yourself why Bruce Cathy went around measuring nuclear critical mass was reduced where magnetic lines cross sacred space on the Earth. Why does sacred space have anything to do with nuclear critical mass? Hint, longitudinal implosion, right? So this is all about phase conjugate implosion. The slideshow gets a bit long at this point, but the superset of the Hebrew tetra is an alphabet of angelics called Ophanim and Enochian, which is actually hypercubic. And the hypercube actually forms a dodeca, which is what formed the movie Contact, in which Jodie Foster took a lucid dream. What's the difference between a lucid dream and a Stargate? A slight difference in density only. So, the idea is that it took billions of dollars to make the Stargate in the movie Contact, but actually, when you understand the physics, so that recursive braiding indexed by the tetra actually causes the DNA to form literally a torus, a ring donut. It was called Lord of the Ring because when your DNA implodes, you become psychokinetic. And this gets into the physics of Hebrew, which we're not going to do right now. We don't need to do all this right now, but just to show, we have lots of literature that shows phase conjugation is the mechanism of cause of perception. We have lots of literature that shows phase conjugation is the mechanism and cause of clairvoyance. Nostradamus, John D. Scrying Stone, the Olmec ancestor phone call mirror. These are all examples of phase conjugate optics, phase conjugate mirrors. So phase conjugation in DNA is an example that now we can know how DNA is making that coherent longitudinal output. This is a little animation, I guess should play our animations. So it's the recursive braiding in DNA caused by that accurate phase conjugate pump wave, the heart and brainwave harmonics of Bliss. And that recursive braiding causes the implosion, which spits out at the center right here, this coherent longitudinal EMF. And here's the golden vortex in the heart that Anna was talking about. And here is this lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, what you will see during death. It is documented. Turns out to be the map to this recursive braiding of DNA. Hello, your DNA knows it needs to implode to get through death because it has to inhabit the array. That's a good bumper sticker. I recommend it. Inhabit the array. So this is the string is braided into thread. The thread's braided to string, braided into rope, and braided into fat rope. So 7 layers of recursive braiding in DNA, all coherently timed by this phase conjugate pump wave measured from the EKG. I'm the one who suggested this work be done. This measured the increase in braid coherence in DNA. Most of you have seen these animations. These slides are not new. So recursive braiding in DNA is the physics of how you squeeze out this coherent longitudinal at the center of the vortex. Here's the dodeca implosion. So what squeezed out the center down the throat of this vortex, specifically at the Planck threshold, is this coherent longitudinal, which is also why a piezoelectric water vortex or mercury vortex can make gravity when it's tuned by equation, etc. So here's the Schumann cascade and the phase conjugate pump wave. Here's phase conjugation, the cause of color and the reason photosynthesis exists. Here's the exact frequencies, very narrow bandwidth, which make photosynthesis exactly golden ratio times Planck, purple and orange. So photosynthesis exists because of optical phase conjugation tuned to Planck. What does that tell you? That tells you why every living plant spits out green, because it doesn't fit. And here's the slide we mentioned for Anna before. This is the university study on which frequencies trigger lucid dreaming, relatively close to a phase conjugate cascade. So physics already knows if you make a frequency cascade, you can trigger lucid dreaming. Now we know why, because you can implode to longitudinal coherence. Here's the report of the same frequencies, Planck fire frequencies, in Therify, triggering lucid dreaming on the therify.net blog page. And here's where we measured the same cascade, golden ratio and Planck cascade, in brainwaves, extreme high amplitude coherence, alpha up to gamma, in Jean Charles Moyen, just before he repeatedly teleports with witnesses, comes back from the beach with sand between his toes, and witnesses verify. So the reason that's teleporting is because if you're dense enough when you inhabit the array, and then stargates are the similar physics, however, again, they can be dangerous because you get dizzy. This is planets nesting in platonic symmetry, stabilizing gravity. Here's the same harmonic cascade predicting when children see without their eyes. They literally flip a switch and make bliss in their brainwaves. And not only are they seeing without their eyes, but they start to get clairvoyant and seeing ancestors. And the physics of that clairvoyance is longitudinal coherence. Implosion cone. So this slideshow is a little bit too long. This is a caduceus electromagnetically. Here is, if you take capacitors, in this case, a super dielectric insect skeleton, and you arrange it in what's called cavity structure effect. You make a vortex in the super dielectric. You make gravity. You can read about it at goldenmean.info/gravitypolitic, Grebennikov, and the unobtainium. And then Elena talks about the city over Saturn, Jupiter, that floats in the cloud on the stones. We know what those stones are made of. They're made of a super dielectric with a cavity structure effect, creating a vortex in the capacitor, which is imploding and spitting out longitudinal. And there's a whole section on warp propulsion here. We're not going to do all this. How pyramids work, global wireless power, how wormholes work. So this slideshow is too long. Here's the publications we did. I think we're done with it. And yes, last thought. So if you take the same phase conjugate cascade in a microwave cavity called the EM drive, and you tune it accurately with my equation, you make gravity. That's the point. And even the mercury vortex in the Vimana, Nazi bell, doped with iron powder to make it red, to make it magnetically flux dense, and then they used a low level of radioactivity to make it quasi-superconductive, as in the Paul Brown nuclear battery. And that red mercury vortex made gravity quite efficiently. It's dangerous. It's nasty. It's not the latest tech. In fact, just to say, has this brought us to the point where we're ready to talk about the current state of galactic politics as it affects Earth? Well, Earth has not reached the stage at which we are actually interstellar. We ain't there yet, because we're still sitting on dinosaurs farting to get propulsion, because we don't know why objects fall to the ground, which is relatively dumb, I think. But once we can teach our physicists why objects fall to the ground and what makes gravity waves, real electrogravitics, then we don't rely on dinosaurs farting for all of our transportation. Ooh, that's embarrassing. So we're suggesting the physics which differentiates, whether we get to the next step in galactic politics is teach your local scientists why objects fall to the ground, help them to know what a gravity wave is and how electrogravitics work. And not only will they know the secret of fire crystals, firecrystal.com, but they will at the same time learn the physics of soul.com, that actually the importance of firing a crystal is cool. Yes, you can squirt yourself across the galaxy, but hello, if you can't do it in your DNA, like find your own source of bliss, then you ain't growed up yet. Okay, was that a happily ever after? What do you think, Tufan? Anna?
Yeah, definitely. And we have to say that we are not planning on shifting or moving any continents with our crystals. It's going to be all good.
Yeah, and that brings up a very good point, Tufan. At the end in the section studying Edgar Cayce talking about the Tuoi stone, his word for fire crystal, he said, well, the reason Atlantis sank, this is Edgar Cayce read one level, he said, the priests didn't realize their fire crystals had entrained the earth harmonics. Now, he didn't use the word Schumann harmonics, which we now know is the earth harmonics, which we also now know newly is a precise phase conjugate pump wave. So how did Atlantis sink? Somebody was messing with the crystals. That's the story from Edgar Cayce anyway, which differs slightly, but is related to the story that Elena Danaan tells very usefully, although she doesn't go into the physics of crystals enough, but that's why we're here. But the part of that story that also was in Edgar Cayce, which I think is instructive, the same plasma field around charge collapse in an implosive crystal is extremely powerful to the psyche. It's literally addictive. It reminds me of when Bruce Lipton told me that he became addicted to doing laser shows because it was so blissful. If you sit around that kind of coherence, it's obviously going to addict you. And it did. And Bruce Lipton said he was addicted to doing laser shows until the equipment crashed. But Disney needs to learn this. It's the physics of bliss. So the fire crystal creates a plasma field which can be used to control people. And this is a warning. I'm not, all sharp tools are powerful and dangerous. So of course, fire crystals are powerful and dangerous. It doesn't mean we should not teach how and why they work, but we have to understand their principle, which is charge collapse. Hint, Dan Willis. So the reason that fire crystals can be used to control people is because they're addicted to that feeling of implosion, very much like Tantra, actually. So, but the side effect, which Edgar Cayce, I believe, talked, I was working with another scientist at that time named Louis Ackler, who's quite famous, wrote Handbook of Astrology, who had too much LSD and remembered his lifetime in Atlantis. And they said, I don't remember now if it was Louis or Edgar Cayce, but they said that the fire crystals of Atlantis were used to enslave, to control so many people that it affected the gravity. I think that's a very interesting metaphor here. We say freedom of speech, individuation, the sacredness of individual freedom is the definition of democracy because it defines self-direction. And self-direction is the difference between being a slave and not being dizzy. Hello. Well, so what is it when we ask Anna, how do you steer in your dream? People can't steer in their dream if they're enslaved and the gravity destabilizes. Anna, what do you think? Steering in the dream?
For me, what I've learned throughout a couple of last months is that you always have to stay grounded, because I would agree that it's very important to teach yourself and then your kids or your family or friends how to implode. Because for me, it's when you implode, I think a lot of people understand like you implode to this plank and then that's it. But then actually it's an expansion. This is how I feel. When I implode, there is this, you implode and then it's like an explosion of your field, of your aura.
There's an array on the other side of Planck. It's called the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz. They were sleepy, but then they got to the Emerald Crystal City. It was a giant crystal array, and that's a longitudinal array on the other side of implosion. And if you can stay awake in that dream.
Yes. So if you stay there, it's a bliss, because for me, it's like you don't need anything else. It's just it's such a happy place in a way that you're content with just being there. And I think it's very important to kind of show the kids that, you can create that field, or show other people that you can create that field yourself and just be there. It's a happy place to be. But as you said, it can be maybe dangerous because you may travel or go places without having enough knowledge. So that's why for me, whenever I try to lucid dream, I always ground myself, imagining that my feet are roots and I stay connected to the earth, so that it's, you yeah, I think this is very important. You stay rooted, stay grounded. You keep, try to do it in a more natural space. And what I would recommend to people is always state that you're a sovereign being, sovereign woman or man, so that, maybe it's a precaution. Maybe it's not necessary, but for me, it's always, I like to say that I'm a sovereign woman, I'm a sovereign being. And kind of for me, it's like, you don't open up yourself to whatever is there. You are sovereign, and then you're grounded, and at the same kind of, I think the bliss that they experience, it's more profound, at least for me. This is what I do.
Oh, it's so nicely put, so nicely. As we tell people, after Therify, you feel tingling with all that energy, but if you don't ground it, it doesn't come into phase, and then it doesn't have leverage on the array. It's beautifully put, obviously from someone who has experience. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tufan. We hope we had fun today. We hope we get to share again soon. We'll see you.
Thanks, guys.
Blessings. Be your own fire crystal. Follow your bliss. Thanks, guys. Follow your dream.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye.